Hello everybody. Today we are going to take a journey back in time. Not just any time. A time that would change everything we know. Imagine the early 1900s, a time of incredible invention and big dreams. Telephones, automobiles, people being connected in new ways. It felt like anything was possible. A feeling of progress filled the air. A world of grand empires, powerful kings and queens, a sense of order believed to last forever. Beautiful, hopeful, but something was brewing beneath the surface. Tensions like small cracks in a vase. Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Russia, they competed, a race for power, for more land, for more resources, a giant, complicated game of chess. So what was that spark? It happened on a summer day in 1914 in Sarajevo. A young man, a Serbian nationalist, assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It should have stayed a regional crisis, but instead it triggered a global catastrophe. Because of the web of alliances, country after country was pulled in. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia mobilized to help Serbia, Germany declared war on Russia and on France. It happened like falling dominoes, and there was no stopping it. The world split into two massive teams. Central powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Ottoman Empire. Allied powers, France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, United States. Young men from across the world, weeks earlier working on farms, in shops, were called up as soldiers. A wave of patriotism swept them up. Many thought it would be an adventure, over by Christmas. They marched off smiling, waving to loved ones, unaware of the horrors ahead. Leaders felt they had no choice. Bound by treaties, driven by national honor and fear. Newspapers fueled the fire, demonizing the enemy and pushing enlistment. War wasn't the act of one person, it was years of fear, ambition, and tragic miscalculations. And so, World War I began. Not a short heroic adventure, one of the most brutal conflicts in history. The reality of World War I was nothing like the glorious adventure the soldiers had been promised. The war quickly bogged down into something called trench warfare, especially on the Western Front in France and Belgium. Both sides dug long, deep ditches into the ground, separated by a deadly stretch of land called no man's land. For years, millions of soldiers lived in these cold, wet, and muddy trenches. They faced constant danger, not just from enemy bullets and artillery shells, but also from diseases that spread rapidly in the unsanitary conditions. Life was a miserable cycle of fear, boredom, and moments of sheer terror when they were ordered to climb over the top and attack the enemy lines, often with devastating consequences. This war saw the introduction of new and terrifying weapons that changed the face of battle forever. Machine guns could fire hundreds of bullets a minute. Heavy artillery could rain down explosive shells on the trenches for days on end. Poison gas was used for the first time, a silent and horrific weapon that caused choking, blindness, and agonizing death. Tanks were developed to cross no man's land. Airplanes, once a novelty, were now used for spying and fighting in the skies. This was warfare on an industrial scale, where the goal was not just to defeat the enemy army, but to grind it down through sheer destruction. After 4 long and bloody years, the war finally came to an end. The turning point came when the United States joined the Allies in 1917, bringing fresh troops and resources. Germany signed an armistice on November 11, 1918, and the guns on the Western Front fell silent. The world rejoiced, but the cost was unimaginable. Over 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, were dead. Entire generations of young men were wiped out. The economic cost was staggering, and large parts of Europe were left in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, placed heavy blame and crippling financial penalties on Germany. The war also changed society. Women had taken on new roles in factories and on farms while the men were away, which helped fuel the fight for their right to vote. The world had been fundamentally remade, but the peace that followed was fragile, and the unresolved issues of the Great War would soon lead to an even greater conflict. The years after World War I were supposed to be a time of healing and rebuilding. People called it the Roaring Twenties, and in places like the United States, there was this feeling of excitement and prosperity. There was new music like jazz and new dances, and for a little while it really seemed like the world was moving on from the horrors of the war. An organization called the League of Nations was created, with the hopeful goal of preventing future wars through diplomacy. But honestly, this peace was built on pretty shaky ground. Then, in 1929, the world was hit by the Great Depression. It started with the stock market crash in the United States, but it quickly spread around the globe, causing a massive economic crisis. Banks failed, businesses closed, and millions of people lost their jobs and their life savings. This economic hardship created a climate of fear, anger, and desperation. In many countries, people lost faith in their democratic governments, which just seemed unable to solve the crisis. They started looking for strong, powerful leaders who promised easy solutions and a return to national greatness. This was the fertile ground where dangerous new ideas and extremist movements began to grow. It was in this environment of despair that dictators rose to power. In Italy, Benito Mussolini and his fascist party took control. In Japan, military leaders gained more and more influence, pushing for aggressive expansion to secure resources for their island nation. And most tragically, in Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came to power. Hitler promised to restore Germany's honor, to rebuild its military, and to defy the hated Treaty of Versailles. He blamed Germany's problems on others and gave the German people a powerful but dangerous sense of national pride. These leaders had no interest in the peaceful diplomacy of the League of Nations. These aggressive new governments began to test the world's resolve. Japan invaded Manchuria in China. Italy invaded Ethiopia in Africa. Germany rearmed its military and moved its troops into lands it had been forbidden to enter. The other major powers, like Britain and France, were haunted by the memory of World War I and were desperate to avoid another conflict. They followed a policy of appeasement, giving in to Hitler's demands in the hope that it would satisfy him and prevent a war. But it only made him bolder. The seeds of a new war, sown in the harsh peace of the first, were now sprouting, and the world was once again heading down the dark path to a global conflict. The moment of truth arrived in September 1939. After a series of broken promises, Adolf Hitler's Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France could no longer stand by. They declared war. World War II had begun. The war started with a terrifying new speed. Germany used a tactic called blitzkrieg, lightning war. Fast-moving tanks and aircraft crushed opponents before they could react. Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, France. By 1940, Great Britain stood almost alone in Europe. Brave pilots fought off German air attacks, the Battle of Britain. The world watched in horror. The war became truly global, fought on multiple fronts. In Europe, Germany turned east. In 1941, it launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. This opened the enormous Eastern Front, the largest, deadliest battles. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan kept expanding, seeking a vast empire. The United States tried to stay out. That changed on December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The very next day, the United States declared war on Japan. Germany declared war on the United States. Italy declared war on the United States. The conflict engulfed the entire planet. The tide began to turn in 1942 and 1943. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy won at Midway. Midway crippled the Japanese fleet and stopped their eastward advance. In North Africa, Allied forces defeated German armies. In North Africa, Allied forces defeated Italian armies. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union won at Stalingrad. That brutal citywide battle cost millions of lives, a crushing defeat for Germany. The momentum had shifted. The final phase in Europe began on D-Day, June 6, 1944. A massive Allied force landed on Normandy's beaches, the largest seaborne invasion in history. This opened a new Western Front. Allied armies pushed toward Germany. Allied forces closed in from the west. Soviets advanced from the east. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in the Pacific continued for months longer. It ended after the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In August 1945, the war came to a final, terrible close. During these enormous wars, the lives of ordinary people were completely turned upside down. It wasn't just the soldiers on the front lines who were affected. Everyone was part of the war effort. On the home front, citizens faced rationing of everyday goods like food, gasoline, clothing. They were given ration books with stamps ensuring there were enough resources for the soldiers. People were encouraged to grow their own food in victory gardens and to collect scrap metal, rubber, and other materials that could be recycled for war production. There was a powerful sense of shared sacrifice, a feeling that everyone had to do their part to help win the war. Women's lives, in particular, changed dramatically. With so many men away fighting, women stepped into jobs that had once been considered only for men. They worked in factories building airplanes, ships, weapons. Rosie the Riveter became a famous symbol of these strong, capable women. They also served as nurses near the front lines, drove ambulances, and worked in communications. This experience gave many women a new sense of independence and capability. It proved that they could do any job a man could do, and it was a major step forward in the long struggle for equality between men and women. Their contribution was absolutely vital to the final victory. But life during the war was also filled with constant fear and anxiety. In cities that were targeted by air raids like London during the Blitz, people lived with the nightly threat of bombing. The sound of air raid sirens would send families scrambling into shelters, whether it was a public shelter, a small Anderson shelter in their backyard, or the local subway station. They would huddle together in the dark, listening to the terrifying sounds of explosions above them, never knowing if their home would still be standing when they came out. For children growing up in this time, these experiences became a normal, if terrifying, part of life. They learned to wear gas masks and to recognize the sound of different airplanes. The war also revealed the very worst of humanity. The most horrific example of this was the Holocaust, the systematic, state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Millions of other people were also murdered: Roma, homosexuals, disabled people, and political prisoners. This genocide was carried out with chilling industrial efficiency in concentration and extermination camps like Auschwitz. At the same time, the war also showed the very best of humanity. There were countless stories of incredible bravery and compassion, of people who risked their own lives to hide their Jewish neighbors, of resistance fighters who fought against tyranny, and of soldiers who showed incredible courage and sacrifice for the person next to them.